Uh, Unfortunately, from my side, I had got COVID Monday night of last week and have been quarantined and in bed for a large portion of the last week. So I think the couple follow-up items where I was going to reach out to Liming and talk about release notes and some of the documentation around the tool chains and such, I did not do.
Oh, that's awful. I hope you feel okay. I hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, no, I'm on the mend. And I'll be happy when I test negative and can leave my office/guest bedroom. But yeah, it's all good now, or better now.
Well, glad to hear.
So Mike, I was just giving everyone an update that I basically didn't work much last week, and therefore I didn't reach out to Lemming, which was my action item. I did do some work on host-based unit tests and code coverage, but we can talk about that in new items. Otherwise, I kind of think that's all we have besides the GitHub code review process updates that you might want to talk about, Mike.
Okay, and actually maybe we can start with code coverage. I don't know, Sean, with you not being available last week, I don't know if you saw my email about Visual Studio open source project for code coverage.
Yeah, so I did use that, and it works quite easily and well. I guess so. This is kind of an open question to the community here of how it would code coverage be impactful, right? So I think clearly as you're writing a unit test, it's super useful in your local scenario to make sure that your unit test is covering all of what you expect it to be covering. And I think we can put together some wiki pages and maybe, make a few things automated where possible to kind of enable that scenario. And that's how I did last week. And I used that tool, that the open CPP coverage or whatever, and it's trivial.
Yeah.
But the real question is there a way that we'd like to see this in CI, in an automation, in a way that helps us enforce policy, right? I think, Mike, you and I have talked a little bit about it would be great to track code coverage. I don't know if it's at the repo level or at the package level, and then be able to put policies in place that say, as new commits come in, code coverage percentage must not go down or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think, my perspective is just kind of maybe 3 milestones on code coverage. And I think the first and most important one is to make it easy for developers who are writing unit tests to know, what paths they've covered or not, and a visual view of that, inside of Visual Studio Code or whatever is the right way to view the lines that are covered by unit test cases and lines that are not, so they can easily make quick updates to their unit tests and improve their code coverage of their tests that they're writing. So I think that's actually the single most important one. And maybe we can just start there. Let's just focus on that until we believe we have all of that there for our Windows and Linux developer community, that they have that ability as far as improving our unit test capabilities, that they have that as great feedback. I think the second stage is not to enforce any specific percentage anywhere. It is simply to have a report, maybe even integrated into our kind of a status from a build, that we know that there's going to be fairly low coverage to start with. Maybe we even summarize it like maybe per package, the number of components that have unit tests or don't have unit tests, that ratio, that count. And then the ones that do have unit tests, what is the percent coverage of the ones that do have unit tests? And just get that into a an output of our CI build, that, or once a week or whatever is the right granularity, that just shows us that, what is our component coverage, and then within the components that do have unit tests, what the code coverage percentage is. And use those first two things as far as a way to get the community encouraged to write more and improve those numbers overall. And then I think the third stage is about, do we want to set some threshold that's considered a minimum as far as code coverage, or an idea that if there's a PR that makes changes that significantly lowers the code coverage across a single PR, maybe that's a PR that we would reject because you added functionality without unit test coverage, along those lines. Or so, I think that's the third one, but I think that's a community decision, A, to whether or not we want that enforcement at all, and B, if they say yes, what are the percentages that we want enforced, or the policies that we want enforced, and leave that up to the community for us to put maybe some proposals together and get opinions from the whole community on.
Okay. So I think, again, I think we need to write up the first one. I think I've done enough to have a good experience on Windows for a local developer. I'm trying to figure out if PyTools can do anything to make that easier, because there is manual command invoking to make it happen. And then on Linux, Project Mu already enabled this into the CI pipeline. And so we do have code coverage being reported. And if you look at our pipelines and have the right permissions, and I guess that would be an open question to the people here, especially ones that may not be a maintainer, is can you view the build artifacts as well as the code coverage artifacts? So we upload all the artifacts, and you actually get a web page where you can navigate through all the source code and see each line, red or green, each branch, all those kind of things. And so I think we have the makings of that as well. And then, figuring out the third one, whether, we can collect that in a way that's machine processable, and then, extract the information and have a number that we could start comparing against. I guess that we could leave that for a future task. So I was gonna, I'll share a link here and see if anyone can view it. It is it's on open source code. And if you can view it, then what that means is that we have kind of a PR and CI pipeline where, as people submit their PRs, they would get code coverage metrics. If they wanted to look, they would be able to see them. Second. Does that sound like reasonable steps?
Yeah.
If someone would be willing in the background to click that link, it is a build, and it should take you directly to the code coverage tab if you have access, which I think we'd want to figure out how to make sure that anyone contributing a change to EDK2 would have access to this. This does happen to be on Project Mu, but it's, again, same stuff. That's what it looks like today. And this is done on our GCC builds using LCOV. And This is also built when you run core CI using GCC locally as well, assuming you have the tools installed. So,
yes, I'm able to open it, Sean, and see everything.
okay, cool.
Yeah,
So-
me too.
Great. So that
And
does seem like the web can be a way to view this. Like I said, there is a local file as well that you can. It basically is the exact same view, it's just locally. So it doesn't have to be through our PR process, but it could be. And in some ways, it's almost easier when it is because it means that you can submit the PR and then you don't even have to have a Linux machine. You can come back later and look at your code coverage.
Right. Yeah, I think, for there's a couple of use cases here. I think, when we're getting it integrated into CI and look at the status of a PR, this makes sense. And then I don't think there's a need to support both the GCov, LCov, and the Visual Studio, CPP code coverage tool. You pick one that makes that provides the best, the easiest, I think, way to implement for our CI system to provide this feedback. I think the value of the supporting both is really for that local developer use case where they're wanting to do high frequency, test case writing and want the feedback immediately without having to submit a PR and have a CI build run in order to give them the feedback.
Yeah, that sounds great. I completely agree.
And I don't know from your evaluation for this CI one, is your preference the GCov LCov path or the Visual Studio CPP code coverage?
So I think they're the GCov LCov one we were able to integrate into the CI system so that if you run the Steward CI command on your package, it will do it all for you and build you the HTML. And that's not how everyone wants to compile their module or run their test. But it's still, I think, a reasonable and it's relatively fast to do. So I think that part's nice, but I think it actually comes down to what environment you're working in. I don't think you're going to be swayed to work in a different environment based on code coverage tools. So I think having both the main environments of a Windows solution and a Linux solution or cross-platform solution probably is the best thing to have. And I think they both work quite well from a local developer's point of view. So I'll take the action item to try to write up kind of the how-to manual. And then I guess, in the next week or two, hopefully someone else can take a look at it and even give it a try. I don't think there'll be anything too profound in there if you've used those tools, but at least let's give it a start, a place for people to start.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks, Sean.
Yep. That does remind me of the topic with Nate, and I think Mike even brought it up the other day around the XUnit style tests. I don't know if there's been any progress to try to bring that in as a patch series into the unit test framework package, as well as the needed documentation for how you'd write one.
Not yet, Sean, but I just wanted to pull and see if that would be there'd be interest, and if the maintainers of the unit test package would be interested in having that patch series show up.
I mean, from my side, I think if it makes writing tests easier and we think more people will write them, I think it's great. I was thinking about that as I authored this round of tests the other day. And I find that there is some value in trying to figure out, what are the logical breakdown of different suites and tests that I want. I don't know if you get that when you start using the automatic registration. I don't know if you have the ability to have different suites. But that does.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, you do? Okay. So, I mean, then I think, having to write less boilerplate code is great. And if it can be plumbed through so that we get, code coverage and we get the test results and the logs that go with those tests output in a way that can be consumed, then I think it plugs right in and it'd be great.
Okay, well, as long as, nobody has any opposition, I can start working on that patch series.
And I think the interesting thing here, Nate, is that I've got a separate branch that we talked about last week about the Google test, which follows that format. I think the advantage of what you're talking about, Nate, is having that same style of unit test declaration in our existing unit test framework that works not just for host-based tests, but also for target-based tests. Right, so it simplifies the developer experience when writing those target-based tests as well.
Correct, or any host-based test that you choose to do in that environment for whatever reason.
Right. And I'm going to share for just a second here, Sean. I don't know if you've seen I actually ported the safe-int-lib to Google Test. And so can you just let me know when you can see my sharing?
Yep, I can see.
Yes.
Okay. And so when I open up the CPP file for the unit tests, you include gtest at the top, and then you do the extern C for your EDK2 dependencies. And then you asked if you could declare the suite and the test. So when you do the test macro from Google Test, this is the suite name, and then this is the test case name within that suite. And so if you reuse the same suite name, they all get registered underneath that same test suite.
I see. Okay.
As you can see, the style is virtually identical to, I actually was able to do search and replace strings to convert the existing EDK2 unit test style into the Google test style. And the other advantage of this one is at the very bottom, there is no registration, right? This is the last test case with its test suite and its test name. And then you just have main that just runs all tests.
Okay. Yeah. And the one thing I was trying to remember is prior to launching these in CI, we set a environment variable because that's how CMACA looks for what the XML output format should be in the file name.
Uh-huh.
And then we collect all those afterwards so that we can report them. Is that stuff all continued here, or is that not do we need more work there?
I think it all works because of the directory names and everything that we use, the file patterns, because when I submitted the PR for this, it showed the test results from this Google test one in the test results for the PR on the EDK2 CI.
Okay, interesting.
I didn't go force a failure and look at the failure condition. I should do that before I move this forward a little bit further.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think bringing forward this contribution would be great. Whether it's both of them or some combination of the two pieces you guys have.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Nate, the thing I think would be valuable is if we can align on that same kind of test case syntax style between the target-based ones and the Google test ones, so that the experience is very similar for our developers that are having to learn, potentially two flavors of frameworks in order to do different kinds of testing.
I mean, that's part of the goal, Mike, is to make it more like, the most of the other ones I see.
Great. So I'm in favor. I know the other Michael Kubaki has joined us now. Michael, are you in favor of Nate working on some changes to update the current unit test that are the CMACA based ones and our kind of EDK2 unit test framework to follow the XUnit style for declaring your test cases in code?
Yeah, I unfortunately may have missed some information about that, but in principle, I think that's a good idea. The idea would be to converge a lot of the infrastructure so that it's similar regardless of which framework you're using. Is that the goal?
The goal is just to reduce the amount of boilerplate code that you got to write in order to get tests to run. And yes, the secondary goal is to make it more like using some of the other frameworks.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I think anytime that I'm writing unit tests, it seems like there's just a significant amount of infrastructural code that I am having to write. So any reduction of that would be great.
Okay, I think that ends the unit test stuff.
So just for your edification, Michael, this is the style that I've oh crap, wrong file, but that's the style that I've come up with. Here, this one is a better example.
Okay. Do you have more on here? Or is this like the only example so far?
Oh, I've got like some real examples too.
Okay. I'll look around on it a bit.
Yeah, that branch has a bunch of stuff in it. You can see there's unit tests for my mock IO library. Those are much more real.
Was this really done 7 years ago?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll poke around a bit on there.
I guess that leads us to any other opens.
No, well, glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, thanks. I guess we'll talk next week.
Yeah, I managed to duck getting
One
COVID on my
thing-
2 vacations, so.
Yeah, so Shoshana, I can give a small status on the code review piece. I've set up a sandbox for working on the GitHub action. It turned out I was trying to do that within my personal GitHub area, and that does not behave identically to having an organization. So now I've moved the sandbox into the Tiano Core EDK2 code review into a set of branches. Like I've got one called dev GitHub actions main, which is where the main version of the trunk of the development of the GitHub action is to support our reviewer assignments, maintainer assignments, reviewer assignments. And then I'm doing PRs against that to show examples. So here's an example that's pretty interesting, because if you look at the upper right corner here, where it shows the reviewers and the assignees, if it has the little key lock there, that means they're a code owner, which is our equivalent of a maintainer. So there's 2 maintainers associated with the files being changed in this PR. And then there's an additional developer that is a reviewer only. And so the PR is blocked until either, in this case, Mickey or Michael would provide an approval of this PR. MD Kinney can do a approval, but that won't satisfy the branch protections that are in there. And then what I've done by default is whoever submitted the PR, I make them the assignee. So in a quick glance in the upper right corner, you see the maintainers with the code owner symbol, and then you see the additional reviewers here. And you can add more reviewers manually if you want with the little cog here. So if you want to add more, you can. And then the assignee is automatically assigned to the submitter. And so what you also see from a status at the bottom here is that this is not necessarily a great one for the rest of the status because it does not, this is a draft. Yeah, this is a draft one. So if I go back one level and pull up one that's not a draft, then here you see that, for example, this has got code owner review required, and it's waiting on a review from either Michael or Mickey. So just one of the, any maintainer that says yes will then allow this to turn that to a green check mark. And I think somebody approve it. Yeah, I think Michael just approved the changes as an example.
Yes, a real-time transition to the green check mark.
So then it meets all the criteria. So this is an example of us now running that that GitHub action where GitHub is taking care of the code owner's behavior with the ones that are marked with the icon. And then we have a GitHub action that assigns the assignee and the reviewers that are not maintainers. That follows the exact same rules that we have in maintainers.txt, but it's now split across two different files. And the code for this is if you look in the .github directory, which is new, you see we have a code owners file, which is our maintainers, and we have a reviewers file, which are the additional reviewers that follow the same syntax as code owners. And then in the workflows directory, we have this is an older branch. So I'm in the wrong place there. Come to this branch. There we go. We have the assigned reviewers YML that takes care of it. And I did from the ARs from last week. We said we needed to look at some of the behavior of code owners with respect to files being added, removed, or modifications to the reviewers or code owners files. I did the experiments to determine that, and basically GitHub dynamically evaluates code owners constantly and updates the state of the PR for the code owners as you add files, remove files, or there are changes to the code owner's file. So I updated this YAML script to also update the reviewers based upon that same behavior I observed out of code owners. So the one thing I had to add, for example, was earlier I was only simply adding new reviewers here. Now I also have the ability to remove reviewers or team reviewers if the state of the PR has changed such that, for example, some files that were modified previously, after some more commits, those files are no longer being modified, and that changed the set of required reviewers to a smaller set. So now we'll actually do the delete review request for those ones that are being removed out. And then it also does this assignment of the author of the PR to be the assignee for that PR. And that's the other clause here that was added. So that's the status for this week. I think I've got that all working correctly. This, from a security perspective, according to GitHub's documentation for GitHub Actions, is terrible. And it'd be better if I actually moved it to a separate action repository and treated all input from the JSON of the GitHub input into the action as untrusted input. So I think that's the one development step that needs to be done, is to get it into a state that's considered a proper GitHub action with appropriate evaluation of untrusted input. Any questions on that?
No, I mean, it sounds good. Try to think of if there's so after this is done, and you've done the work to move it, kind of what is the next required step?
I'm going to take a couple of our code reviews from the mailing list and open them up as PRs in here and ask the developers that are working on it to come view it in that view and provide some feedback so we can go through that experience with a few and look at the state changes. I know there's some ones that we've talked about before that we want to force, for example, like the V1, V2, V3 with the forced push and look at the state changes. But I also want to give the rest of the community a chance to look at the assignments, the review assignments, the maintainer assignments, and the code review experience, just as a couple walkthroughs of some things we're already looking at, and get their feedback from the rest of the community on that.
Okay, sounds good.
And the other thing I'll point out that's an interesting thing from a security perspective is there's a pull request one and this pull request target. The difference is that if you are doing PRs based upon other developers' forks, meaning that the developers created a fork of the EDK2, they've made their changes on their fork and then submitted the PR back to the EDK2 repo in TianoCore. There is another interesting security perspective about the fact that the actions themselves and the YAML files for driving the actions are part of the code. One of the things that can happen is that a fork of it can attempt to change your actions to either subvert your CI system to get stuff in, or other things like trying to extract secrets and things like that. So use of pull request alone without this pull request target gives the PR that's being submitted only read access to all of the resources within TianoCore. The only way you get write access from a fork is by using pull request target. Now, what's interesting about pull request target is that does not use the code as submitted to actually run the PR. Okay, it actually uses the head of the target branch to evaluate the PR. So that's the head of the branch inside of our TianoCore repo is the code that's used to run the GitHub action. But you can then separately pull the PR that is being submitted to evaluate it. And what they tell you is do not use, this pull request target to run a build of the code that comes from the fork. And you can force that to occur, but they tell you don't do that because that's exposing you to those security issues. I'm using this pull request target. I'm not doing a build of the code. I'm only using the write access to update the state of the reviewers on the PR, and that's all. And I'm not ever pulling the code. I'm running the code from our TianoCore repository, not running the code, the action code from the submitted PR. So it's an interesting subtlety that I learned about how you manage to get write access to, for example, the reviewers' information, but do it in a what's considered a safe way from GitHub's perspective.
So that means like I could make a branch, but then the branch is really a set of patches. Then this thing's going to just grab the patches and apply that in the other repo. Is it going to apply? Is it going to like make a copy of my branch and do it, or is it just going to apply the branch against top of tree or something? I mean, the patches against top of tree.
You get to choose what you do because you have to actually pull the code you want down in your steps here. The part that happens automatically before we get to these steps is which version of the actions code is running. So if you use pull request target, it's going to pull it out of the target branch that you're trying to submit the PR against, which means you can never actually test out changes to the action code itself.
That makes sense to me. I'm just wondering if that's like impacting I'm just trying to think of this from the other side. Like, what does it mean from the developer point of view? Sorry, I forgot to mention that part.
Right.
So-
Yeah. So for our firmware code, it's no impact, right? Because we're like, it's this is really the only when we're because when we want to go do a build against the firmware code, we can use the pull request style because we don't need to write back to anything, right? We're going to go
Yeah.
pull the
Oh,
code,
gotcha.
do the build, and generate artifacts with the logs, right? So that's a safe path. It's only when you need, as part of one of the actions you need to do along the jobs here and steps here, is to actually do a write action back to some of your critical data.
Right, I'm just trying to figure out, does that mean, but is it a copy of the branch that's getting written to, or?
Oh, yes. I see what you're saying. So yes, when you submit a PR, the set of commits associated with the PR are actually added to the target repository in a separate set of commits that you can pull with it's in the set of branches that you can go pull.
Okay,
Specially named. It's not in the visible ones. If you just do get branch -a, there's instructions on how to go pull a specific PR out of the target repository that the PR is against.
but then it's, all the work is happening on the branch that the developer created then, even though if it's different copies?
Yeah, I think the
Because our some of our internal CI doesn't actually work that way. That's why I'm asking.
right, and it all depends on whether or not you're a fork-based development or submit branches to the all your developers have write access to the primary repo and submit branches in that repo for change requests. So the model we're suggesting for Tiano Core is we want to be able to accept change requests from anybody, whether they're one of our maintainers that have write access or one of our reviewers that only have triage access, or even somebody from outside of our community that's wanting to submit a change. We want to be able to take changes from all of those types. And that last one is the one that requires us to do it for sure from a fork of EDK2 instead of a branch within the EDK2 repo.
Right. Oh, so
Yeah,
so
Matt.
the developer points at their fork, and then
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think the fork model is most appropriate for this large of a community.
Yeah, because I was just wanting to make sure we didn't have getting like hidden cruft in the Git repo that makes it swell over time that causes problems, but
Right.
or
And
deny
there's
a service attack.
Right, and there's another very interesting attribute that I noticed about the pull requests, that one of the things that happens when you come in as an external collaborator that's never interacted with your project before, it will not, for example, this action to assign reviewers is held in a moderated state until one of the maintainers approves it to run. So a first-time contributor to Tiano Core, their PR will kind of be in this holding pattern until a maintainer looks at it and then allows that to go through. And then once it's allowed to go through once, any future contributions from that same new collaborator will go through without moderation. So you can think of it kind of like our mailing list approvals for bringing in new members and approving them for interacting on our mailing list. It's a similar concept here. Is do you trust this collaborator to be submitting code changes to your project and run these jobs?
I thought that last feature was an option, and I would have thought that since you did this thing with the pull request _ target, you wouldn't have needed to do that.
Probably correct. And you are absolutely correct that it is an option, and I've got this as the branch I've set it up with. So we've got like the require review from code owners is the one that we've got in there. That is, you showed the blocking state until Michael approved. And then you also have this interesting thing that if you don't want to have to wait for reviewers for all pull requests, you can do exceptions. like for me to be able to make changes to that YAML file as I'm trying things out, I made myself so I can go ahead and let it go through without review temporarily as as like an admin kind of option there. And then I think the one you're referring to is in the actions settings, general. And it is here, require approval for first-time contributors. So I enabled that one. You can say require approval for all outside collaborators unconditionally, or only require approval for first-time contributors who are brand new to GitHub. So this is like if there's a bot creating accounts, submitting stuff, you know, that would be a good one to check to keep junk from coming in. You know, this one seems like the good middle ground, right? Like if they look like they're doing good stuff as their first contribution, let them in and let them make future ones.
Okay, sounds good.
I know there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of details, but I think this is part of getting this set up to have as much automation as possible, is understanding all of these options, and also making sure we're doing the right thing from a good, secure action runners, because I think we've already seen some problems in some of our other services where we've had some spam show up and stuff like that. So want to make sure we're doing the right stuff from the beginning so we don't have to fight that battle down the road.
Yeah, makes sense given we get the spam on the mailing list too.
How does the spam get on the mailing list? Like I thought someone had to approve it. Do they get approved in spam?
Well, when you're one of the people approving it, you get to see all the spam. Not so much if you're not. Unless I click the wrong button or Mike clicks the wrong button.
Yeah, there's been a few occasional things that have slipped through, but not much.
Yeah. But it's like almost every time I approve something, there's usually spam in there too. I approved something today and there was half of it was spam, half of it was legit. So I can see why there needs to be some protection against someone trying to do a check-in that's some kind of spam message, trying to sell something.
You know, like somebody changing the bitmap to something interesting for the splash screen.
Yeah. Yeah, I doubt they would be that sophisticated. They'd be more like just trying to submit a file that's some kind of marketing message or something into the repo. Or into 100,000 Git repos at the same time. Anyway, it seems like good progress, Mike. I'll have to take more vacations.
Sounds good, Andrew. We should all take more vacations.
Yeah.
All right. Any final things from anyone? All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll call it a week.
Thanks.
Thank you.